After enjoying 10 years in power, the AIADMK will make way for the DMK led by MK Stalin to take charge as the new government of Tamil Nadu, coming even as it does as India and the state of Tamil Nadu is battling the second wave of coronavirus infections and the rise of hospitalizations and fatalities as a result. To make sense of what voters have wanted from the next government of Tamil Nadu and why they voted the way it did, we're joined by Mr. N. Ram, the former editor-in-chief and former chairman of the Hindu Group, one of the country's leading newspaper journalists, publishers, and commentator and a keen watcher of political activity in the state and the country. Mr. Ram, thank you for making time for BloombergQuint. Your initial take on the nature of the verdict in Tamil Nadu and why it has panned out the way it has.
I think it's a clear vote for change. It's not so much anti-incumbency because the chief minister, I think the AIADMK has put in quite a creditable performance given all their problems. But I think one of the factors is, I think going with the BJP was a liability. BJP turned out to be a liability because that's what we get from the ground, and the poll results also suggest that. Actually, right now, although the English channels are showing 140, that sort of thing for the DMK alliance, it's closer to 160 according to the Tamil channels, and I think it will go up. There'll be what they call a bump towards the end, so they are heading towards 160 or a little above that too. This was exactly what the poll I have a lot of respect for predicted, which was presented on Puthiya Thalaimurai, one of the news channels, one of our independent news channels. They projected something between 153 and 157, may go a little over or in that range, but I think it's a clear vote for change. It is not so much anti-incumbency. The DMK is a cadre-based party. It's worked very hard during these times. Stalin has worked. It's not just his father's son. I think he's worked very hard in this as part of his party and movement, and I think it's his day.
You sort of preempted my next question to you. In these 5 years since the DMK lost that election in 2016, and since the passing of both Chief Minister Jayalalitha and for, 2 years after that of Mr. Karunanidhi, how has MK Stalin been repackaged to the voters in a way to say this is the man you should be voting next? For somebody who's been in public life for practically 5 decades, as MLA, as mayor, in multiple roles, and last in government as deputy chief minister, at a time when that government that went out in 2011 wasn't entirely popular because of the way it handled the use of public money. So between the government that went out in 2011 that had Stalin as deputy chief minister to the one that comes in now, how different is Stalin being projected to voter as the person they want?
I think to get an insight into this question, we have to go back to 2016, the assembly election, when a lot of people expected Stalin to be projected as the chief ministerial candidate, perhaps even within the party, but that didn't happen. And they lost very narrowly. Usually in Tamil Nadu, quite often, the swing is quite big from one to the other, you know that. But it didn't happen in 2016, so you could say it's a delayed effect of that. But then there's a change in the AIADMK also, and there's no doubt that Chief Minister Panisamy, EPS as he's called, has improved his stock. But in all polls, MK Stalin came out as the leader with the most popular support in Tamil Nadu. And although, as you say, he's not a new face, there was an expectation that he should be given a chance. And that's exactly what has happened. And I think they also worked very hard. They got, among other things, Prashant Kishore as a backup. I think he provided some system. He gave independent advice, he and his team. Of course, I heard an interview today where he says, I make only a marginal difference. But I think all that helped.
You're the second person who's used the word back. You're the second person who's used the word backup over here. What do you mean by Prashant Kishore as the backup to the existing cadre of the DMK? In what role was he? In what way is a backup role different from an active role that he might have played, for example, in Bengal? I'm trying to understand the nature of the operation that he provided.
I think in West Bengal also he said much the same thing. I heard that interview with Srinivasan Jain, which was very interesting. He says, I'm not, the political party or leader is not my client. I'm their sort of aide. So he gives independent advice. I think they They do surveys, they give policy advice, they do, it's quite expensive. But he says, we don't collect any fee. So what they do is to, give independent advice, sometimes advice the leader may not hear from others in the party, especially if the gap between the leader and the lieutenants is huge, which I think is the case in many parties.
In this case, it was onboarded well by the DMK.
Yes, the DMK, I think, was very sensible in getting him on, and it was always made clear that, this is an advice, you can take it or leave it, but they'd have to do the job. But he gave independent, for example, how many seats to give to other alliance partners, what is the strike rate you need to go for, how do you protect yourself, don't underestimate the opponent, this sort of thing. That's what I mean, backup or not, whatever the word is. It's a sort of inputs, which he considers professional inputs, but not available to anyone who can pay, he said. So I think that happened in West. There must be therefore there's a political, presumption that I will not support so-and-so or somebody else. Say the BJP.
My next question is, what is done with that mandate in a state that is already amongst the most industrialized in the country and has always had a large network of a welfare net that makes sure that through adversity times, there are schemes that are doubled down on. This is a party that in its previous stints in power had a problem with the way it was viewed about how it carried out some of that industrialization. So if Tamil Nadu doubled down on the semiconductor or the telecommunication sector, there were questions raised on whether certain power centers in the DMK had an advantage in that being so. At a time when Madras and other cities and the transportation infrastructure were upgraded, there were questions asked about whether flyover projects were handed out in a fair manner or not. Those questions have always surrounded every DMK administration. How does Stalin make that different this time around? What does he need to, how does he govern differently from the past regimes of the DMK?
I think a book came out recently on what they call the Dravidian model. It's quite a major book. It's worth reading. Some of the things, the authors claim that Tamil Nadu is unique in that it combined, growth or development with welfare measures. The growth may have had some deficits, but they contrasted it with Gujarat and even Kerala. And this is the author's claim, and they try to substantiate it in this book, that plus Tamil Nadu has shown, whichever party was in power, that you can do welfare as well as development. That's what the claim is. It's worth reading. And industrial growth has been quite impressive in Tamil Nadu. There are deficits. On the other hand, there is rent seeking, what economists call rent seeking, corruption, which is very systematized. I think it's been much greater under AIADMK regimes than the DMK regime. And one of the challenges before the new chief minister, the presumptive chief minister, MK Stalin, will be, I think, in this order, how to tackle the pandemic. The cases are rising, although Tamil Nadu has advantages in that there are more hospitals, there's a public health system of some kind. The oxygen is not in critical shortage and so on. That's one. Number two is, what do you do about development and how do you improve on that? And three, you can't get rid of corruption. That's too much to ask for anyone, but you can make a dent. So I think Stalin, I've known him for a long time, and I've also been in touch with him recently during the pandemic, and I got to know how they're working, the DMK, and what he's doing. I think he would want to make a mark and, not just be under his father's shadow, but come out with his own stamp, if you like, or to make his own mark. And that, I think, that desire has to be translated into reality. But if the numbers go up, they'll have a majority on their own, no doubt about that, the DMK. And maybe they were expecting a higher number, but the AIADMK has turned out quite a creditable.
That was going to be my next question. Normally, had it been a massive pendulum swing one way or the other, the way normally Tamil Nadu elections have been, and this has not been so, in the absence of having Dr. MGR and then Jayalalitha, when out of power, Was there a thread that had this been a complete decimation for the AIADMK, it would have been hard to keep the party together, because what kept the party together for the last 4 years was the fact that there was power to hold on to. So there were three factions, one of which left the party, two which patched up, tried to get the third faction in, didn't work. There was power that kept them together. Does the AIADMK stay together out of power?
Yes, there was that fear that if it was routed, then the leadership, that is particularly the chief minister, EPS as it's called, would collapse. That's not happened. The other point is the other factor in the equation is the BJP and the central government. They propped up this government in many ways. When there were defections, they managed many things for them. So the junior partner, in some senses, was in the driving seat. Very much the junior partner in terms of politics and electoral support, electoral activity. But because they had the central government in their hands and were able to use it, manipulate it, if you like, I think they were able to prop up this government. So now the AIADMK, I think, has proved that it doesn't need that. A common criticism we heard during the campaign and even otherwise in politics in Tamil Nadu is, whatever you say about M.G. Ramachandran or Jayalalitha, when they allied with someone, it was an alliance of equals. In fact, they were the senior partners. And you remember that in Jayalalitha in 2014 went on her own, spurned the BJP and won big. But this is not seen as a relationship between equals. I don't want to use harsh words because they've been called slaves and all that, but they have been dependent. They have been non-independent in many respects, supporting their policies at the center while claiming that they distance themselves here and so on. So this, I think, has cost them heavily, despite the fact that the chief minister, EPS, has improved his stock. But they will not. It looks like they will not collapse, and they can consolidate their position as an opposition.
All right. As he comes in as the presumptive next chief minister of Tamil Nadu, MK Stalin will have quite a job on his hands to provide relief on the medical front and on the economic front to his people in the state as this pandemic reaches a plateau and then ebbs from the current terrible situation we're in. Mr. Ram, thank you very much for making time for BloombergQuint and its viewers. And I hope everybody who's been watching this stays safe.
Thank you.